So exciting to have you all join us. I'm Kim Robinson. I'm the editorial director here at UC Press, and we're excited to be here today to help demystify the publishing process. This workshop is a joint effort of UC Press and the UC-wide Collaborative of Humanities Centers and Institutes. And I want to give a special thank you to Judy Wu at UC Irvine, who initiated this event and was crucial in planning it and bringing it to fruition. So thank you, Judy. So first, a few housekeeping things. We will be recording this main session. We won't be recording the breakout groups. And please mute yourself. And we also suggest that you select speaker view in the upper right-hand corner so you can actually see each speaker that's coming on. And after the presentations, there will be a bit of time for Q&A in the large group, but because it is such a large group, it's really hard to track raised hands or see raised hands. So please post your questions into the chat, and we'll be monitoring those questions and trying to answer as many of them as possible. But there's going to be more time for questions in the breakout groups. So when the general Q&A session is done, we'll move into 6 breakout groups with editors. And you'll be able to choose your breakout group at that time. It'll become obvious. They'll each be named by editor and subject area, and we'll post the options at that time. And those sessions will last about a half an hour. So if your question doesn't get answered in the main session, it might be answered, there might be an opportunity in the breakout groups. So I'm going to briefly introduce each panelist and then just hand the presentation over to them, and they'll do the handoffs between themselves. So our first presenter is Kate Marshall. She's an editor at UC Press for 3 lists: anthropology, Latin American studies, and food studies. And she's going to talk about choosing the right press and preparing the proposal. And next up will be Archana Patel, associate editor for art history. And she's going to talk about approaching an editor and a press and peer review. Our third speaker is Raina Polivka, editor for music, film, and media studies. And she will focus on revising the manuscript and working with the publisher to promote the book. And finally, we have Beth Digesser, professor of history from UC Santa Barbara and our current chair of the UC Press Editorial Committee. And she's going to talk about the role of faculty editorial boards and any advice she might have to junior colleagues about the publishing process. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Kate.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, I'm going to present on researching presses and developing your proposal. Normally when I give these presentations, I spend 20 or 30 minutes, so this is a very quick overview. You know, it's good to have some content here. So this is a really good time, especially if you're in graduate school or recent graduate, to start focusing on researching presses. You know, obviously the place to start is your bookshelf. You want to look for books that have been published within the last 3 to 5 years, maybe, and think about who's publishing these books that you are most excited about. The other important thing to do right now is to start surveying the current publishing landscape. So before COVID, strolling the exhibit hall at conferences was really the best way to see who is super active in your field. Doing so, you know, the goal is to figure out who's attending conferences that matter to you and what they are showcasing. So, you know, and so what you're really doing is at a conference. So for example, I publish in Latin American studies, but I don't publish in literary studies. So if you are someone who attends the MLA, you will notice that we don't have a booth and I'm not there. And that's something that you should be aware of if you want your book to really reach that audience. So use the conference exhibit, virtual or not, or real, to determine who's active in your space. But of course, there are no conferences right now, but I will say most presses are doing really creative things to announce their books, ranging from virtual exhibit halls to extensive blog and social media campaigns. But one thing that I recommend doing is downloading or reviewing old conference programs, which almost always list all of the previous exhibitors from past years, and then using that as a guide to start exploring websites. If you are on Twitter, I strongly recommend following editors, following presses, and conference hashtags. Frequently, presses use hashtags more than conference participants, so you can get a real sense of what's going on at presses through social media. And I also strongly recommend signing up for subject-specific e-newsletters from presses in fields that you're aware of. So for example, you can sign up for UC Press's general email newsletter, but you could also just sign up for anthropology or music or whatever. And then now is also a very good time to talk to people about their recent publishing experiences. So as much as we all love our advisors, note that someone's publishing experience from 10 or more years ago is not likely to be representative of an equivalent publishing experience today. Many things have changed in publishing, so you want to figure out what you want to talk to people who have recent experience. And you should also be striving to figure out what's important to you. Is it the reputation of the press? Is it the size of their publishing program in your field? Is it the engagement or enthusiasm of an editor, the copy editing, the peer review process, the production timeline, or marketing and publicity plans? And finally, a really good thing to focus on right now is exploring prospective book series. Many books I publish are in a series, many books I publish are not in a series, but the one thing I would mention is that I meet a lot of authors through series editors. So, and because series editors are usually external fellow scholars, it can be an easy way to connect with the press if you first connect with a series editor. So it's worth doing some research there. The goal here is to identify several presses that you will target initially. Note that this is all research you do before you formally submit proposals. Graduate students often send me their dissertations or a CV, and that's really a bad strategy. You know, at minimum, you should have a coherent précis or fleshed out proposal and some revised material before you are approaching editors. Okay, so what goes into the proposal? Publishers often have proposal guidelines on their website, but typically all publishers want 5 key pieces of information. Number 1, a summary of the book. Number 2, a short annotated table of contents. Number 3, a statement about the market and audience. Number 4, an author biography. And number 5, the logistical nuts and bolts. So let me go over those things. So part 1 is the summary of the book. The biggest mistake that editors see here all the time, especially from authors who are revising dissertations, is an exhaustive statement about how the book fits into the literature or what gap it fills. This is the wrong approach. Within your first 3 to 5 paragraphs, your summary should articulate just the basic, who, what, where, when, why, what is your book about, the original argument and story. And by the end of that short introduction, the editor should understand why your book matters. Part 2 would be an annotated table of contents. I think people go overboard here. Basically, we just want to know what is the structure and organization of your book, and a very short paragraph explaining what is in each chapter, particularly if your chapter titles are not really clear. So that's part 2. Part 3 is the market overview. So this is the section where you identify your audience, so who will read or teach your book. You want to provide a list of comparable books. So what kinds of titles would your book sit next to at a bookstore or on a syllabus? Please also let us know if there are direct competitors to your book. So there's comparable titles and then there are competing books. So is there another book on your topic? If so, how is your book different? This is where you help us understand how your book fits into the field. You put this information here and not in your project summary. I also want to note that publishers only care about comparable and competing titles that are recent publications, or we primarily care about recent publications. So think of books that, again, have published within the last 3 to 5 years. Also, if you think your book is a particularly good fit for a press that you're approaching, it's a good idea to highlight their recent titles, but you don't have to exclusively tell me about California titles if you were pitching to me. In addition to competing and comparable titles, you should also let us know if there are any niche audiences for your book. So for instance, I just did a book on eating disorders, and it's a book that has a significant anthropological audience, but also there's an outside the academy audience. So just please explain who that niche audience is. And if you think your book has classroom potential, you should tell us what courses it would be used in. Finally, I just want to emphasize that it's important to be realistic about the audience for your book. Most books are not for all readers, so specialized scholarship is rarely for general readers, and that's totally okay. But we want to know who's going to read and teach your book, and this is a great place to communicate that. Okay, part 4 is an author bio or some sort of explanation of your platform. People frequently send me their CVs, and that's great, but I really like to read a statement about who you are and who your community of readers will be. So remember that your publisher is your partner. So your platform matters a lot to us. Are you online? Where do you publish? Where do you speak? What conferences do you attend? Who is your intellectual community? If you are publishing in any space, even if it's not related directly to the content of the book, we want to know about it. Often people pitch monographs but leave out exciting work that they do, like they're the book review editor for X, Y, or Z journal, or they're on the board of Jacobin, or they were interviewed by NPR on a podcast. Knowing what your existing platform is like helps us figure out how we can support you when the book comes out. And then 5, you need to provide logistical nuts and bolts. So what is the total length of your manuscript counted in words, not pages, in words, and your art count? So your total word count includes everything, including your notes, bibliography, or acknowledgements, like basically everything except every word in the book except for what will eventually be your index. Most books I publish are between 80 to 110,000 words total. And it really depends on the field. History runs longer, social science tends to be a little bit shorter. If you are way above 110, 120,000 words, or if you require color printing, these are things you should bring up early on because it may not be possible for the press or your editor. So after the word count and the art count, you need to provide information on the status and timeline for completion. So how long do you need to finish your full draft? If you are more than a year or 18 months away from submitting a full draft, you're probably contacting presses a little bit too early. Most presses would like a list of suggested reviewers, which Archana is going to talk about. And then you should highlight any relevant information that an editor needs to consider. So can you bring in subvention? Do you have access to subvention? Have you previously published chapters that you intend to put in the book? We recommend no more than 1, maybe 2 total. Are you asking us to compete with other presses? It's worth noting that many editors will pass if asked to compete for a first book. So transparency is really key here. And finally at UC Press, we ask authors to send a statement explaining how their manuscript is different than the dissertation project. Okay, I'm going to stop there and let Archana take over.
Thanks, Kate. So hi, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to approach an editor or press. So when you are thinking about approaching an editor, the biggest misconception is that you have to wait until you finish the project to do so. It's actually the complete opposite. You should try to connect with an editor beforehand. We receive hundreds of proposals and queries over email, and while we do review each of them, cold emailing an editor is usually not the best way to get in touch about your specific project. If you connect with an editor beforehand, we'll be better positioned to look out for your proposal and to take a closer look when you do submit it. So in pre-COVID times, academic conferences were the best moment to connect with an editor face-to-face. And I still want to touch on this briefly in case we ever return to some kind of normal. So if you do want to meet with an editor, you want to reach out at least a month or maybe 2 months beforehand. If you wait until the week of or the day of, it'll be too late, and most editors will have already filled up their schedules. At the conference itself, we always try to block out time to stay in the exhibit booth, but there's always a chance that you may miss us or that we'll be busy helping someone else out, so requesting a meeting is usually the best way to get in touch. If you do book a meeting, sending a proposal or something about the project beforehand to give us some background info is really helpful. This does not guarantee that we'll be fluent on the project by the time we meet, I'm afraid being in meeting number 15 of that day, being stuck at some third sub-level venue without any sunlight messes with your mind a little bit, but it's still helpful. So even if you do submit a proposal, I may still ask you the same basic questions. Instead of leading with the chapter by chapter breakdown of what the book is, what I want to hear about is, what is this book about? Why do you care about it? And why should I? This may seem a little repetitive, but I found that people are much better at answering this question in person with clarity and with passion rather than a written proposal. So I actually met with an author this past CAA whose proposal I had in hand for a little while and wasn't quite sure about, but within 10 minutes of meeting, he completely sold me because I was like, oh, this is what this book is actually about. So I like approaching these meetings like having a conversation. You tell me things, I ask some questions, and we suss out these answers together. Another reason why these meetings are a conversation, not a presentation, is because you should also feel free to ask questions. This is your opportunity to figure out if this is the right home for your project and if this is the editor you want to work with. So remember, you want to find an editor who's excited about your work because your editor is your partner at the press. They're the ones building excitement for your book with their colleagues. They're the ones you go to with a problem. They're the ones you want to have a real collaborative partnership with. So now that we don't have in-person conferences, take advantage of the fact that there's no geographic restrictions. If you're attending a virtual conference, see if the editor's on a publishing panel, sign up for virtual office hours, use social media to get in touch. You can reach out anytime, but if you still want to tie it in some way to a conference, I would recommend reaching out afterwards when the editor is a little bit less busy. And if you saw them on a panel, it's a great way to incorporate that into the email when you reach out. So as Kate said, for first books, you should be on your way to finishing your revisions before submitting it for consideration, but it's always okay to connect with an editor beforehand. So once you are ready to submit, most presses have guidelines on their website, but for UC Press, reach out with the short email about what this book is about and why it's important. And this is the time to name drop if you have some connection with the press or with one of our authors. And then if an editor is interested, we'll ask for a proposal and a sample chapter or two. So a couple of don'ts really quickly is don't email multiple editors at the same press. Just email one editor. And if we're not the right person, we'll forward it on to the right editor. And do not send us the full manuscript as an attachment. And then finally, give us some time to review the materials. We get hundreds of proposals constantly, but we do review each and every submission. And then, so once you have your short paragraph, you've submitted your proposal, the editor is on board, excited, ready to go, and you have a full manuscript ready, the next step is peer review. A couple of things to keep in mind. Like Kate said, in your proposal, we ask for a list of potential peer reviewers. These should be folks that you think will be helpful and are actively engaged in your field, not the top 10 historians today. It should have relevance to your specific subject. It should not be your colleagues or advisors, because that can be a conflict of interest. And if your book is interdisciplinary, your list of names should reflect that with scholars from different fields. And so you should take some time to think of these lists of names because it can tell us that you're engaged and that you're networked in the field. And then this may go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that when you submit your manuscript, it should be in a polished form. We're asking your peers, faculty, fellow scholars to really put time, work, and labor into reading it. So it should really be in its best form. So each manuscript in peer review is read by at least 2 reviewers, sometimes 3, depending on the project. Peer review typically takes 2 to 3 months, but because of the pandemic, it's taking longer. So 3 to 4 months, sometimes longer. But this is your moment. It's your moment to take a breath, get a little bit of distance, or if you're working on an 100-image art book, it's a good time to start gathering images and permissions. After we receive the reports, we'll send it back to you. You may be hoping for the reports to come back and say, this is amazing, it's going to be in the New York Times bestseller list. But really what good peer review does is that the reviewer understands the merits and the potential of the project, clearly understands what the authors are arguing, and then offers constructive feedback to make it better. So if the reports come back with criticisms or suggestions, that doesn't mean you didn't do a good job or that the project isn't great. That's the job of peer review. And that's the way the book becomes better. On the flip side, sometimes the two reviews will come back with complete opposite feedback, and that's when your editor steps in. So we'll discuss the reports, we'll talk them through and figure out the best path for the book. Sometimes that means sending it out to a third reader for clarity. Sometimes I'll ask you to revise and then we'll send out that version. Just a quick side note is that for some presses, a negative report can mean the end of the line, but not at UC Press. We'll work with you through this process and through revising the manuscript. Once we have positive reports, we'll bring the project to our internal committee for contract. For that meeting, we'll ask you to submit a letter of response to the reports. This is a formal document. It'll be read by our colleagues internally at the press and our faculty editorial board should it move forward. So while you may disagree with some of the suggestions in the reports, it's in the letter itself, it's best to be deferential to the readers, not be defensive, and it should be written in a professional voice. And then one final note is that we all know peer review isn't perfect. There's biases, behind the scenes politics involved, and I say this to acknowledge it and to also see that we as editors see it. So again, you're not alone. Your editor is your partner and your advocate throughout this whole process. All right, I'm gonna pass it on to Raina.
Great, thank you, Archana. So I'm going to talk a little bit about revising the manuscript as well as collaborating with presses for promoting your work. I'm going to approach the first part in two ways. The first I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of quick tips about revising the dissertation. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about revising the manuscript once you receive those peer review reports as you're preparing it for publication. And then I'll end, like I said, with some notes on how to push it out into the world to make the most impact and get the most reach for your hard work. So the first thing about the dissertation is that you should all be prepared for the fact that your book project is going to look vastly different from your dissertation. Oftentimes I hear scholars who are dissertating say, but I'm writing it as if it were a book, or my mentor has told me that this can be published as is. The fact of the matter is that's simply not the case in the book world. The dissertation is unto itself its own kind of genre. It's demonstrating a mastery and a skill over a specific discipline or subject area. You're also writing for about 5 people on your committee who all have their own expertise that they bring when they come to your dissertation. On the other hand, for the book project, you're writing for a more expansive audience. It could be interdisciplinary, it could be across disciplines, it could be for readers who, and it will always be for readers who are not necessarily coming to this with an assumed expertise. And so the book itself needs to be a very different way of approaching your material. Dissertations are also typically written in under extreme duress. Scholars are often faced with funding challenges, personal challenges on the home front, teaching, service, the job market. And so dissertations really are kind of an exercise in endurance and fortitude. And by the end, oftentimes it's the healthiest thing to just tuck it away for a while. I do suggest, as many of my colleagues I know do, that taking some time away from the dissertation after its completion and defense is really important. This is a time in which you should be reading widely. Toss in some poetry, some novels, read some of that, go back to some of those books that you discovered during your research that just really resonated with you. Were there books that really spoke to you in such a way that you felt that you wanted your own work to somewhat model or dialogue with that book? There's no reason to reinvent the wheel with your own first book. Find books that you really enjoyed reading. What did that author do that was really successful? How did they approach their material? Were there entry points that really that were accessible, that you could kind of replicate and model in your own kind of writing? So read very widely. During that time, aside from digging in and researching presses, this is a time to try to get the most mileage out of your dissertation that you can. So looking to submit articles for publication in journals is a smart way to kind of, for several reasons, to get your foot in the door, to get your name out there as an expert on the subject, to start kind of opening that field up to your voice and the long form work that is yet to come. It's a way to, of course, help build your CV as you head out onto the job market. And it's a way to really kind of reassess the writing that you did in the dissertation and what is more appropriate for a journal, and what might be that seed, that gold nugget that you can really develop and expand upon for the book project itself. Oftentimes I work with authors who say, man, there's only one chapter from my dissertation that made its way into my book. Or just as I was finishing my dissertation, I discovered this amazing resource and I finally hit upon that question that I really wanted to ask. That could be the impetus for the book project. I will say that editors are very aware of fatigue. So if you are tired of your project, if you can't look at it again, this is not the thing that you should turn into the book. Editors really want to be working with scholars who are excited and energized and really want this book to be the breakout point for them as scholars in the wider world of academia and public scholarship. So looking at journal publication, this is also a time to visit conferences and start really presenting on your material. Peer review, and I will hit upon this again, peer review comes in many, many forms. The presses, of course, initiate that formal peer review. And journals, of course, initiate their own formal peer review, but peer review occurs at conferences when you get feedback from your scholars, from other scholars in your field. Peer review comes among your own mentors, both within your dissertation committee, in your department, and elsewhere. So throughout now and throughout much of your career as a scholar, inviting your colleagues, I should say, to read your work and to give feedback, even if they're not experts in that field, they'll be able to tell you if it's approachable, if it's accessible. So conferences, journals, really taking that time away, and hopefully after that time, you'll hit upon that thing that you want to make the book project. Some things to think about as you are digging back into the dissertation. The dissertation, typically, there's several things that really mark a dissertation, right? One of them is the literature review. Much of that gets stripped out in the book project. We want to see you talk through the theory. We want to see you dialogue with people. We want to hear your own voice. We don't want to hear the voices of others. Many dissertations, that kind of that authorial voice is submerged and subordinated to other people's claims. In the book project, you are the expert. The reader wants to know what you think and why this is important. So that hedging tone really needs to be discarded with the dissertation. Often dissertations, again, they're kind of an exercise in demonstrating your expertise. So there's tons chock full of notes and things of this sort. Those really need to be stripped down. The important information needs to go into the manuscript itself or be relegated elsewhere. The other thing to think about is often dissertations are written in chunks. So you'll have like chapter 1, which is a case study of X, Y, or Z. Chapter 2 is the case study of, and they kind of are a bit disparate. For a book project, and this we see a lot in the annotated table of contents, we are really looking for that connective tissue, that brings all those chapters together, that really demonstrates the arc of your argument. So those are just a few nuts and bolts. Again, to turn now to revising the manuscript now once you've received those peer review reports. You might have received peer review reports at a proposal and sample chapter phase. You might have received those peer review reports at the complete manuscript phase. Either way, this is an opportunity for you to work with your editor just to determine what are the important aspects and elements of those peer review reports that need to appear in the complete manuscript. Peer reviewers, oftentimes you don't need to accept everything in the peer review report, but this is a time to talk with your editor about what needs to appear there. Editors, for me, the thing that I really enjoy doing with authors is kind of helping them think of those big picture ideas. What are those? How are people coming to the book? How are they approaching the book? Is it accessible? If you're writing an interdisciplinary, for an interdisciplinary audience, can those various audiences access your material and glean what they need from that material? So those will be things to think about too as you're finalizing those revisions for the manuscript. Have you defined your terms? Maybe a film person might know this term, but if it's about film music, a music person might need to be introduced to that context or that concept. Is there context around your argument? These are things that really need to be thought through on those revisions before final submission. The other thing to think about too, of course, is documentation. We typically follow Chicago Manual of Style at the press, but we are, as long as it's consistent throughout, is what our project editors typically say. But making sure that while the meat of the manuscript is there, you're also paying attention to the apparatus that you're using in the book. So making sure that those notes are complete and clean. If you have a bibliography, making sure that they're cross-referenced sufficiently and appropriately is really good as well. So these are all things to help your manuscript sail through production easily. We love delivering clean manuscripts to our project editors and our copy editors. That makes their work so much easier and will allow them to provide more, I think, constructive feedback at the copy editor phase if they're not sitting there having to comb through notes and things of this sort. So those are some good practices for the revisions to the manuscript. Finally, at the press, so once manuscripts are sent into production, we typically take about, on average, 8 to 10 months to produce a book. We really want to work with the author and with our colleagues to make sure the book is coming out at its most propitious time. So if there's a conference that it needs to be out for, if there's a 10-year package, if there's a book event, these are all things that we take into consideration when we set up our scheduling for the year. When that book does drop, it's really an exciting day. Authors get advances. We usually send complimentary copies to readers, blurbers, if anyone helped supply the cover art, all of these elements. And then this is the time when you as the author are then called upon to kind of mobilize your networks. Pedaling back to that author platform that you supplied us with in your proposal, will really, our marketing and publicity departments really work with authors to get their work out to the appropriate audiences that we feel they can reach. We, of course, do print ads, but this day and age, much of our marketing is done digitally. It's the digital sphere where people are discovering new ideas, where people are discovering content, and where we hope people will discover your book. At UC Press, we consider this very collaborative, as we've all been saying throughout this presentation. And as much as we pull on our own expertise, the reason that we really emphasize that collaboration is because at the end of the day, you as the author are the most authentic self-advocator of your own work. You know what it's about. You know the people who need to read this, and that really can make or break the success of a book. So I'll end it there, and I'll leave it. I think I'll turn it over to Kim Robinson to help field some questions.
Actually, next up is Beth Digesser.
Sorry, thank you. So sorry.
Quite all right. Hi, everybody. And thank you so much to Judy and Kim and the IHC directors and the editors and all of you for coming. This is the number of people showing up today is beyond our wildest imagination. And we're just so grateful to all of you for making this such a great event. I'd like to do two things today before we divide up into breakout rooms. I chair the editorial committee for the press, and so I'd like to pick up where Archana, Kate, and Raina have left off to describe the faculty role in the process and the role of the editorial committee, which is a little bit unique for UC Press. Then I'd like to back up a bit and review for more junior scholars how you might best navigate the system. And I suspect that there will be some things that more senior scholars it'll be good for you to hear as well. So first things first, one of the things that makes UC Press unique is the degree of faculty involvement in the publishing process. And that is, we do that through the role of the editorial committee. Right now, there are about 18 members on the editorial committee. We like to have 20. We are all UC faculty, and more often than not, we represent all 10 campuses. We even have often a member from UCSF. Membership on the committee is reserved to faculty from the UC who are published authors, so usually faculty who hold tenure. And we map onto the disciplines that the press publishes. If you've spent any time on the press website or you've looked at our catalogs, you'll know that the press doesn't publish everything in the academic world, but that we have lists, there are specialties. And so we get together 7 times a year. We used to get together in Oakland, and this year we have been getting together by Zoom in our respective offices. Where do we fall in the process? Well, we are close to the end of the process. This is what happens. We all, each member of the editorial committee works with primarily 1 or 2 of the acquisition editors. And so you see how we pair up with the list specialties of the press. I'm an ancient historian, and so I tend to work most with Eric Schmidt, who publishes in late antiquity, but I've also done work with many of the other editors as well. Once a manuscript has gone through the review process and the author has responded to the peer reviews, then the member of the editorial committee gets that manuscript in hand to review. So we see what the editor has to say about the project. We see the identities of the peer reviewers. We see how the author has responded to the peer reviewers, which is why it's nice when you're polite in response to the peer review. And then what we do is we read the manuscript and we assess the level of peer review. So has the peer review been appropriate? Are the peer reviewers the right people to have reviewed the manuscript? Did they do a good job? Did they recommend appropriate things? And has the author, in fact, responded appropriately to these suggestions? So we aren't, there are exceptions, but we aren't exactly a peer reviewer, but we are a link in the process ensuring that the book is up to the quality of the press. And so once we have all that material in hand and we've done our review, each of us, for the books that we're reviewing before a meeting, each of us writes up our own report. Before each of the 7 meetings, each of us has 2, sometimes 3 book manuscripts to review and to report on for each meeting. When we all convene in the meeting, we have already read one another's reports. And so we meet as a group, and each person reports on the books that he or she has read and makes a recommendation. In our recommendations, we may find that the manuscript needs no further review. It needs no further work from the author. This is often the case. But we might also recommend that the author make some further changes to the manuscript. You should not see this as a giant gorilla on the path to publishing. You should see this as part of the collaborative environment that the editors have described, in which your faculty colleagues really help your book over the threshold. So we don't intend this to be to scare you, but really as part of the process to make sure that your manuscript is as good as it can possibly be. The editorial committee, we tell ourselves we hold the imprimatur of the press, and so no book is published by the press before and until the editorial committee votes that it ought to be. And so on each and every manuscript that comes before us, we all vote on whether it should be published or not. So this is a good thing. I think that our involvement in the publishing process as faculty means that the press is kept aware of the faculty point of view. At times, faculty involvement has helped the press and the editors keep a break on the commercialization of the press. It also means, and I think this will be more and more the case, it means that on each campus, there is expertise about the publishing process. And today's program is part of that effort. We can also help the press achieve the goals that we all share, increasingly for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can as a group, help the press achieve those goals and offer ideas about how best to accomplish them. So I'll be happy to take questions about our involvement in the process, but I thought I would spend the rest of my time talking how best to navigate this system from the faculty point of view. And I think right now, under our current dispersed conditions, it's especially important that you all know how to do this, since, as you've heard from the editors, we're in this difficult situation where we can't be face-to-face anymore. And up to now, so much has really relied on our ability to be physically in the environment where the editors are. Now, I want to preface my remarks to say that grads and junior scholars, this is not about pressuring you to write, but my remarks are really aimed at being savvy about how to get your book published well before it's ready. And I think the best advice I can give you, which you've also heard from the editors, is to be aware of your publishing environment and to pay attention to the resources that you have ready to hand. Participate in and populate your world. Now, I'm a historian, and so my world mostly is spent in the 3rd and 4th century. Those are the people I know best. Those are the people I hang out with. Ethnographers are going to have a different kind of world. You need to extricate yourself from that world. And in order to give your book life, you need to participate in the environment of scholarship. And that means that you need to let the authors and the editors and the publishers of the books that you rely on come to life for you. You need to let those names become people, and you need to reach out to those people. I know that many of us are introverts and we find this kind of thing to be stressful, but one advantage of the pandemic is that you can do this all from your desk. So don't think of this, I would say right now, as a kind of research project. What are the presses that whose books you most often handle in your hands? When you go to the websites, who are the acquisition editors who are producing those books that you handle? What books, what are the books that give you pleasure to engage with in your work? Why is that? What's the quality of those books like? Who are the editors behind those books as well? What catalogs look best? When you look at a catalog, what are the ones where you turn down the covers, the page corners the most? These are the presses that you should be paying the most attention to. UC Press may not be that press, but if UC Press is that press, then I can say that you've got a great collection of resources right here, and this meeting can help you navigate those other presses. So populate that world. As a potential author, you need to know who the acquisition editors are. These are the people who you'll communicate with and reach out to about your book. As Archana did such a good job explaining, just dropping in an email with your old dissertation is not the best way to do this. Participating in fora like this right now is a good way to do it, so that an editor can associate a name with a project, and so that you can be in touch with this person on an ongoing basis. I can say that we are just getting ready to publish a book by an author with whom the editor just made contact when that editor was in graduate school. So think of this as a process and not just a once every 6-year event. Make the press part of your community and populate it. Reach out to the editors and allow them to get you to know you. If you can arrange, meet them for coffee or what have you once we're all back to physical life again. When you're looking for a press, in addition to handling the books and seeing, what books are well made and produced, talk to your friends and your colleagues about their experiences with certain presses. I know that sometimes you'll learn that certain editors are terrible to work with, or you'll learn that this press really doesn't do a good job copy editing. Not the case for UC Press, but you get to learn these things the more people you talk to about the process. You should also, as your manuscript develops, you should also talk to your deans. Those of you who are junior faculty, your deans will play an instrumental role in the tenure process. And so your deans will have a solid sense of what presses they don't want to see from their faculty. And it's good to know that ahead of time. UC Press supports UC authors particularly, so that's a good thing to know. But there could be and ought to be 2 or 3 presses that you'd have in mind from the beginning. When you are preparing your manuscript for publication, you've already heard about how it should not be your dissertation. And why taking time away is important in that transition process. I would say that it's important to step away from the dissertation for a little while for another reason. And that is because as part of the tenure process, many research universities will want to see that you've added new work to the dissertation before considering that the book it publishes is tenure worthy. What do I mean? So if you were to simply publish your dissertation as your first book with no changes, then ideally this would be 6 years after you'd gotten your first job, and your department and your dean would want to see that you'd done more research in that 6-year period. So that's why you want to take some time before publishing your monograph to think of how you might incorporate some new material so that you can show yourself as an active, engaged researcher. This does not mean that you should scrap the whole project. It doesn't mean that it has to be an entirely new branch of research. But you might think about adding a new chapter that's part of the bigger whole. And so graduate students, this is good advice, because you don't necessarily, there may be things that you are researching that you would want to hold back from the dissertation that you could save for the book instead. And so thinking about this strategically ahead of time can help alleviate some of that stress between the dissertation and the monograph, and give you some of that new material to work on as you're thinking about how you want to revise the dissertation into the book. Now, assuming that you've made good contact with your acquisition editor and it's gone out for peer review and it's been successful, you'll want to then respond to your reviewers. And as several of the editors have said, you want to show gratitude for the investment of everyone's intellectual energy into the project, but you have certainly discretion about what to include and what not to include in your final manuscript. And we would all expect you to be able to weigh the various recommendations and to decide what will enhance the project and what might take you down a path that you don't think is appropriate or might be a kind of distraction. We might, at this point, you might also think about the role of a development editor as well. This is a term you might not be familiar with. These are people who can, for people whose first language isn't English, can help you refine the prose style of your monograph. And even for those of us who aren't gifted writers, a development editor can be helpful. This is not something that the UC Press that we keep on staff, although we probably would have suggestions for you. And then finally, once the book is being produced and promoted, as Raina said, you can serve really a fundamental role in ensuring that it gets good attention. If you're on social media, you can promote it. If you're not even, you can ask your colleagues to help arrange a book launch for you. There are a number of ways to make sure that people become aware of your book and engage with your book, all of which can help raise your profile as a member of your department and of your field. I'm going to stop there. I know that I've left lots of questions unanswered and perhaps even provoked a few more, but it's probably most productive for us to answer them as best as we can in the breakout section. So I'll turn it back over to Kim.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth. And thank you to all three of the panelists. We have some great questions that have been generated, and Kate Marshall's been actually typing up quite a few responses. I'm going to throw a few of the other questions to the panelists to take live, and we have a few minutes before we go into breakout groups. So Kate has answered some questions about workshopping and about competition, about public presence, COVID, and the timeline. So maybe we can talk a bit about the second book, how the process differs, and if you publish first in a non-academic, is it bad for publishing academic next? Oh, choosing a press, if your first book wasn't with an academic press. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about second book dynamics. Raina, do you want to take that?
Sure, happy to. So second books, I mean, at this point in your career, you've already had your first book out there. One of the things that the second book, I think, really allows you to do is kind of maybe stretch that creative muscle a little bit more, take some more risks intellectually, and to really break out of that kind of monographic, narrow field that got you hopefully tenure and your foot in the door in your discipline and in the scholarly world. Second books, oftentimes I think editors are willing to consider books at an earlier stage for the second book. So they may not require the full dissertation at this point. They may require just the proposal and a sample chapter, for example, to initiate the peer review process and the contracting process. And I think second books can be really exciting. Some things that happen in contracts as well is that there is this right of first refusal that some presses request for that first book, that might compel you to reach out to the same press for your second book. This is something to think about when you're publishing, when you start getting into the publishing world as a scholar. I think at the end of the day, most people just want what's best for the book and for the work at hand. So I think I'll end it at that unless there's further questions to that point.
That's great. I think we have time for about 2 more questions before we go into breakout groups. We had a good question about interdisciplinary work and how to pitch it to UC Press specifically. If your home is interdisciplinary, like Black studies or ethnic studies, any advice for comparative work, religion, philosophy? I mean, we deal with interdisciplinary works daily. So Kate has been working in interdisciplinary fields for a long time, so I'm going to ask her to address that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was starting to type something and I wasn't quite, I think, finding presses that are really present at conferences that are interdisciplinary and sort of celebrate, you can go to a press's website and see how they organize their lists, right? So like, do they have an American studies or a Black studies or a food studies breakout on their website? That can be a pretty clear indication that that press has experience marketing in that area across multiple fields. So again, it's really about going to conferences, but engaging with sort of conferences that are in those interdisciplinary spaces and figuring out which editors are attend and are present. Again, like at UC Press, that's something we really celebrate. And I do books that in food studies, my books are present at many conferences throughout the year, conferences that I don't attend. Similarly, I'm not the only person who's ever published on Latin America or on food at UC Press, but I represent those books when I'm doing sort of the market planning. So yeah, again, I don't know if that's, I just would say like we know how to get to interdisciplinary audiences, both in those informal networks, but also like marketing across disciplines. So that's something I would emphasize as a quality of your scholarship rather than a challenge.
Raina, did you want to add something?
And I just wanted to piggyback off Kate. When you're putting together your proposal and you're listing those readers that you think would be good for your book, making sure that you have readers from those multiple disciplines that you see your work kind of hanging in, that will also demonstrate to the editor that you know the fields that you want to speak to, and will help us target the people that will provide that good feedback.
Great. Well, we don't have time to address the other questions in this main session, but I encourage, we're keeping track of them. And if your question wasn't answered, please bring it to your breakout session. So we're going to I'm going to post what the breakout sessions are in the chat, but we're also going to, you have to choose it. So it will appear on your screen and you will select your breakout session, which will appear by editor and discipline. So they're in the chat now, and I believe Summer, my colleague, is going to invite you all to join the various breakout groups. So I posted the list of breakout groups in the chat, but you should be getting.
You just sent it to me. You sent it as a direct message.
Oh, let me send it to the whole group. And then, and if anyone has difficulty joining a breakout room, just hang out in the main room and we'll help you get assigned to a breakout group. I'm gonna ping Summer and make sure she's not having technical difficulties. So so Summer opened them, but I don't think anyone's getting a message to join them, are they?
It seems like some
If you
people
look on your-
successfully joined, but okay.
You have to click on the little blue number.
I'm on my iPad and there's an icon that says join breakout room. And if you click that, then you can choose the room. Is somebody else on a computer and maybe they can share their instructions?
Yeah, I'm on a computer, but I'm not sure what the instructions are. I can't see any rooms.
Okay. There's a little thing on the home row that has like share screen, chat, and then breakout rooms.
Yeah, but I don't have the breakout rooms one.
Yeah, me neither. I don't have it either.
So you might not have the most updated version of Zoom.
But I know the administrators can put us in the room.
Yes, I can do that, but just message me.
Yeah, not for 142 people, I understand.
Yeah, it's a bit.
Not sure what to do.
If you have the most recent version, if you click on breakout rooms, you'll then see a huge list of people. And
yeah, but I don't have anything that says breakout rooms.
For those who don't have that option, go ahead and put in the chat which room you'd like to be in, and we'll try to put you in as soon as possible.
Thank you.
One thing I've done with my students is have them change their name to the breakout room they want to go in, which it's still a pain in the butt for a lot of people, but might be a little bit faster.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. Thank you.
That's a thing. Oh, thank you.
For those who are just hanging out, let us know if you have questions and we'll try to respond.
It'd also be a little bit more helpful if instead of saying room 1, 2, 3, or 4, you say the editor or discipline, because I think they might be numbered a little differently on my administrative access.
Hi, Judy or Kim. I just had a quick question. I consider education to be my home, and I was thinking about going to American Studies. Do you have any advice on maybe where I should go? I was thinking maybe also going to the general room just to learn a little bit more. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would recommend either American Studies or the general room. I think either of those are good options.
Cool. Thank you all.
Quick question. So I'm in a similar Fine. So I'm in African Studies, and I don't know which of these rooms would more likely maybe hinge potentially on that.
I think Neil's. That was actually his graduate school field, right, Kim?
No, it's African American Studies.
Oh, okay.
We
But
don't.
he's from Africa.
Yeah, he's from Africa, but we publish books about Africa in some of our various fields, so it's the responsibility of lots of different editors. So is there a main discipline that you are working?
Comparative literature.
In literature. We don't have a literature list, so why don't you just join the general room with Tim and myself?
Thank you.
For the editors who are, sorry, for the editors who are hitting their rooms, do you want to try to enter them now so that you can host this conversation? I could stay in the main room.
I just have a question about my category, if I could. I'm ancient Roman archaeology, actually. Would that be best in history?
Yes, Beth Diggeser is going to join Niels in that room. So
great. Okay, thank you.
Can somebody explain how an editor initiates I haven't done this before.
I think that Summer has to assign you to the room. So Summer, maybe you can prioritize assigning the editors to those rooms. I wish I could help. I can't help assign people. It seems overwhelming. Nancy?
I'm gonna move you into your room. Me and Judy can stay here in the main session.
I also don't have that power in my little.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do people have questions while you're waiting to be assigned?
How do you get to the room?
Summer's working on that, so she will assign you as soon as she gets through that list.
Please change your name to which room you want to be in, either the editor or discipline.
Again, yeah, I'm just trying to send a message to ask to be assigned to the general room, but will I automatically be assigned there?
Ernst, can you change your name? Do you know how to do that? On your Zoom screen? And if you could change it to general, that'll make it a little easier for Summer.
My name to general.
I've put you into the room. You just need to accept the breakout room invitation.
And no, I'm just trying to remember, how do I change? I go to participants or something, or to change my name?
Oh, you don't need to change your name now, Ernst, but you should have received an invitation to accept the breakout room.
Oh, okay. Right.
Summer, I know you're really busy, but I see that Archana is still here. Maybe we should get her into her room.
I thought I did. She should have received an invitation.
Oh, I see. Thank you, Fatima.
For those of you who just have room 3 or 4 in your name, you'll need to put the fields or editor, since the order of the rooms is different for me. And I'm not reading the chat, so please change your name, and so I can assign you.
How do we change the name?
You should, so if you click on view and instead of gallery view, or you make it, instead of speaker view, make it gallery view, you just click on your icon and there'll be like 3 little dots and it'll let you rename yourself.
I'm renaming some of you as I follow the chat. If you don't know how to change your name, just put it in the chat and I'll change you.